The following is a Shaw TV Public Affairs presentation. Constituency Report is produced as a public service by members of the BC Legislature through the facilities of Shaw TV.
Hi and welcome to Constituency Report. I'm Tim Renneberg, your host, and my guest today is Selina Robinson. Selina is the New Democrat MLA for Coquitlam-Millardville and the opposition spokesperson for local government and sport. Selina, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we're coming to another end of another spring session of the legislature. Just in 30 words or less, what's your take on this, on the Liberal government's performance?
Well, part of the thing that we did, that major piece of work that we did this spring was take a look at the budget and have some serious concerns, serious reservations, and I spoke about that in the legislature. But the fact that regular folk are going to be nickeled and dimed to death with increased park fees, increased BC Hydro rates, increased MSP, really feeling the pinch of those increased costs. And then, of course, the Liberals gave those who make the most money in our province, the top 2% of income earners, they got a tax break, $236 million. So the burden on the middle class and folks who work really hard, they're really going to feel it, and I expressed those concerns in the legislature this session.
So I just want to talk about some specifics about some of the things that happened, that have been happening in here. Bill 11. Tell us a little bit about Bill 11 and why it matters.
Well, Bill 11 really speaks to the school boards and the powers that they have or now that they don't have, and the impacts that this government was having on public education in our communities, like right across the province. And certainly for School District 43, that has had very, very difficult challenges over the last number of years with balanced budget challenges and ongoing underfunding of public education. They were basically threatened with this bill that if you don't do what we say, then we're going to come in and fix it for you or do what we think needs to be done. So that was really very, very problematic. And also, after the longest strike that we've had in history, and saying, well, we're going to make peace with the teachers. We need to move forward for our students, for our children. We're going to work together with teachers and heal, right, and mend, and only to say, well, we don't trust you teachers to make decisions about professional development. We're going to dictate, we're going to tell you exactly what we think you ought to be doing for professional development. There's no other profession in this province that gets dictated to by government, and in this case it was another instance of this government not respecting teachers and not doing what they said they would do, and that was very, very disappointing. And I worry about how that affects students in Coquitlam-Millardville and throughout the Tri-Cities, when their teachers are feeling kicked once again, and when our school board is being threatened. That to me results in some real problems when you have a democratically elected school board and then you say, you know, you wag a finger at them, and that's what Bill 11 has done. And
I mean, it's kind of a double-edged, a two-pronged attack here. On one hand, they're saying, yeah, we're going to trust the teachers more, but on the other hand, they're taking more control over the education system away from the school boards and imposing more restrictions on the districts. What are some school district trustees and people in your community saying about this?
Well, part of what's really challenging for all school trustees, I mean, they are democratically elected, and the reason why we have school boards is because there's this belief in public education that local decisions make for better decisions, that there are unique needs across this province. And in School District 43, there are different needs than there might be, for example, say, over on the island or in the Peace region. So we get to make local school boards, elected school boards, get to make decisions, and we as constituents get to vote for who we want to represent and make decisions on behalf of our children. So we just had an election in November. In the Tri-Cities, it's a brand new school board, mostly brand new, had a huge changeover, real opportunity to get in some fresh faces, to take a look at what it means for our students and make local decisions. And this bill that we debated in the House basically says, starts to pull back on some of those local decision-making abilities. And I have some serious concerns when all decisions come out of Victoria, and that's what this means, that the minister will be able to make decisions for all parts, for all 60 school districts in the province, and that's not what school boards are meant to do. So it makes me wonder what's going on and why are they centralizing power, and I think that that's a dangerous thing for our school boards. It's a dangerous thing for our children.
The government's rationale was what exactly?
Well, that's an interesting question, Tim. Trying to figure out what that is, why now, after the longest strike in history, why you would do this. The only thing we can suspect is that there is not a value for public education. I value public education. My kids went to public education. I am a product of public education, and I know that my colleagues value public education. It is the greatest equalizer we have in our society. No matter, how much money your family earns, what part of the province they live in, what the resources are in that particular province. The idea is that all children will get access to education and will have an opportunity to develop to their fullest potential. What's happening now that we're seeing is that classroom sizes are getting bigger. There's more children with individual education learning plans in place. So that's what the composition part of the issue has been. So rather than having 3 or 4 students, there might be 7 or 8 students who have a specialized learning plan. And so it starts to create some real challenges for teachers around how do they meet the needs of all children, because every single one of their students deserves the attention of a teacher who feels appreciated and valued in the work that they're doing. And everything I can see this government doing does not support that. And I think I certainly lent my voice to the debate about valuing public education and making sure that the students in School District 43 were well represented.
I just want to switch topics a little bit from from education to healthcare. Healthcare is everybody tells us that healthcare is the most important thing in terms of what people are talking about when they're thinking of political decisions. The Liberal government brought in this thing called GP for Me, where they promised that every British Columbian would have a family doctor by 2015. Yeah. And it's 2015. How is that working out so well?
Well, that's a question we ask them, certainly in the legislature. How's that working? Because you promised. It was an election promise. I think it was a 2009 election. That was a promise they made to the electorate, that they would spend the next 6 years making sure that there was a GP for every single British Columbian. And we know that is not the case. I've certainly heard stories. I even have personal friends who have said they actually got turfed by a GP because she decided to actually leave and go to another community, and the other doctors, GPs, couldn't absorb them, and because they were not identified as the sickest, needing the most care, they are now without a GP, and these are people in their early 60s, and so they're wandering around trying to find a GP. We've also learned, and this is the part that really concerns me, is that local governments, mayors and councillors from all over British Columbia are now talking among themselves about how to attract GPs to their community, because it makes their community more livable. It helps with economic development. If people feel like there's healthcare in their city or their village or their town, so they're competing now for physicians, and initially, certainly last year, when I was starting to get curious about what was going on, we heard it in smaller communities, for example, in the interior or the North Coast, that they were being challenged. And this year, I heard from some of our local councillors who are sitting on a committee that looks at healthcare in the Tri-Cities, that even in the Tri-Cities, we are short 44 GPs for our population, and there are 15 more GPs expected to retire this year with no replacements anticipated. And so we're going to be short, 55, 60 doctors, GPs, for the population, and that's concerning. So it's a huge provincial issue, but it's also coming home to roost in suburbia, that there just aren't enough GPs to serve the population.
And this is the funny thing that we heard in the last week or so is that the government's not really even keeping track of how many people are without a family doctor.
Right.
How do you measure calculating who's got a family doctor if you don't actually keep track of who's got a family doctor?
I have no idea how this government operates. It's disappointing. When I worked for Share Family and Community Services, which is the largest social service agency in the Tri-Cities, we would look at a problem and we would identify what are the needs, and then we would try to problem solve it and figure out, so what do we need to put in place in order to fill the gap, fill the gap in service. We've certainly seen this around GPs, and I think it was just last week in the legislature, it was the same thing around homelessness. I mean, I got involved in politics because of the homeless issue in the Tri-Cities, and I was instrumental, I believe, I believe I was instrumental, and I think others would agree, in getting a homeless shelter built in Coquitlam. I was part of the council when we made that decision to bring forward land so that government could build 60 beds, 30 of transitional housing and 30 for shelter beds. And this was raised in the House just last week, and we asked the question, well, how many homeless are there still? And all the minister could do was get up and talk about how many beds they brought online, and then actually point fingers at me to say, well, I was even at, you know, the ribbon cutting, which really wasn't ribbon cutting. It was just an announcement that these beds were going to be built. And how dare I? And it's like, well, that's great. We've got 60 beds, but if there's 400 in their community who are homeless, 60 beds just isn't going to cut it. And again, this government just doesn't know the scope of the problem. They are not measuring the scope of the problem. They're just throwing little bits of money at it and hoping it will go away. I don't think that's a good way to govern, and I don't think that's a good way to make policy decisions. So
we've got a few minutes before we take a break, but I just want to talk about some local issues, some local events that you've been involved with, and we brought some photos to talk about some of these. So I wonder if we can go through them
Sure.
with you. So we'll just show them up, flip them up in the monitor, and we'll have a look.
That's great. Well, you know that as an MLA, we spend a fair bit of time in the constituency and supporting different community groups. So this one is at Festival de Bois. I'm with the MP Finn Donnelly and Councillor Benita Zarello, who's on Coquitlam Council, and it's the largest French festival, I think west of, I want to say Manitoba, could be wrong, and it's always a fabulous event. It's in the heart of Millardville, and great music, great food, good poutine, good smoked meat, and my favorite, the Sugar Shack. And this is, I host an Easter egg hunt in the community, and we talk about services for children as part of it, and the kids go crazy to hunt for Easter eggs. It's just amazing. It's just a couple hundred people come out to enjoy it. And I always love to celebrate volunteers, and these are a group of volunteers with success. They do a tremendous job in our community helping people integrate. I really believe that when you have and you help people integrate into the community, we all benefit, and Success does a great job of that. And so I've joined them on stage. And this one, we had a wonderful visit from some women firefighters. Paula Fado is in the front there with me. She's a Coquitlam firefighter living with breast cancer, and certainly challenged, and would like to see these as part of the recognized cancers, as part of the WorkSafe system. And she's struggling with that right now, so we were talking and learning as much as we could about the challenges that she has.
So we got about a minute before the break, and I know you wanted to pitch the Doggy Day in the Park.
Yes.
And we'll talk about the private members bill after the break, but tell us about the
So we've got
day at the park.
Doggy Day in the Park on Saturday, May 23rd from 10 until noon at Mundy Park. It's a time to celebrate all things dog. We will have a photo booth. We'll have someone trimming dogs' paws. We'll have a vet, and the opportunity to talk about my private members bill that people can learn about, I guess, when we get back from the break.
Well, that's a good place to start. We'll take a short break, and we'll come back and talk about dogs with Selina Robinson, the MLA for Coquitlam or Millardville. Stay with us, won't you? Hi, and welcome back to Constituency Report. I'm Tim Renneberg. My guest is Selina Robinson, the MLA for Coquitlam Millardville and the New Democrat spokesperson for local government and sport. Selina, just before the break, we were talking about dogs. because that's what we do on Constituency Report. We talk about dogs. Tell us about your private members bill.
So this came out of a resolution that came from Kamloops. The city of Kamloops decided to ask the provincial government to give cities the power to allow their bylaw officers to break into vehicles when a dog might be in distress. And this came out of the 6 dogs that died last year from overheating in the car when the women ran into Costco for a few minutes and hid the dog. Said the dogs disappeared, and that's a whole long story. But when I saw that resolution, I thought, you know what? This is something that is nonpartisan. It's something that we ought to look at. The idea is that people love their pets, and they don't intend for them to die in their cars. They just think they're running in for a few minutes, and we need to really get the word out that it's never okay to leave your dog, even for a few minutes. It's summertime. It's getting warmer. You know, cracking the windows just doesn't cut it. The cars become like ovens. So I brought forward a private member's bill, really asking for 2 things, asking the provincial government to give cities the ability to allow bylaw officers to break into vehicles to let dogs out, because right now you have to either call the police or a conservation officer, or SPCA conservation officer. There's not a lot around, there's only 6 of them in the province. And the other one is to make it, you get a fine from the Motor Vehicle Act to include that this is serious. And so at Doggy Day we've got a petition going in the community, and at Doggy Day we're going to be asking people to sign the petition, asking government to debate this private members bill. It doesn't happen that this government sees it fit to debate private members bills. I think that's problematic, and we're going to urge the government to bring this one forward. We'll see whether or not they do that.
It's worth a shot. It's this is part of your portfolio as the spokesperson for local government.
Yes.
It's an interesting file. You're dealing with crossing boundaries between what's the provincial government responsibility, what's the local government's responsibility. What are some of the bigger issues that you're dealing with in that file?
Well, there were a number of ones that came up this last session. The big one was the Auditor General for Local Government, also known as the AGLG. So I'll be using that sort of going forward because it's a mouthful.
Fewer words. Yes.
Yes, and the AGLG's office was set up really. It was just an idea that I think just sort of flew out of the Premier's head because the legislation was so poorly written, and it came to light just this last March. And really, the idea that the Premier wanted to do was to really, what I think, spy on local governments. This belief that local governments, mayors and councils, don't know what they're doing. They just keep spending taxpayer dollars, and that she, along with her Liberal colleagues, were going to demonstrate that local governments, spend poorly. And so the office was set up 2 years ago, and without any real consultation. I mean, there was a little bit of conversation with some bodies, but they don't believe that they were properly consulted. And legislation was brought in by, I believe it was Ida Chung in 2012, and the office was set up. And I was a sitting councillor at the time, and suspicious of the office. I'm always interested in doing good performance measurements. It's always something that I've pushed for when I was on council. But there's also legislation that says that local governments cannot run a deficit, and so they don't. They are actually very good at following that law, and they don't run a deficit. And so I've been following this file very closely when I became the spokesperson for local government, because I was a little bit suspicious of it. And in this March, I asked the minister, why is it that her government has spent $5.2 million on this office that was supposed to produce 18 reports. It promised 18 reports in the first year, but up until that point had only delivered 1 report.
That's in 2 years.
In 2 years.
Yeah.
Spent $5.2 million over 2 years to produce 1 report.
And the odd thing was that the work that this office was set up to do was already, that work was already, could have been done by the Auditor General.
Right, the Auditor General for the province.
Yes.
Yes. So that office already exists, and it would have been the kind of thing that would just expand their ability to do some work. It's an office that's well respected. It's an office that's fully independent. And of course, there were certain challenges when we asked the minister to be accountable for this colossal waste of money, she wasn't clear in the legislation. The legislation wasn't clear. It became this big, what I think, fiasco of who's responsible for wasting $5.2 million. And in the end, the minister fired the Auditor General for local government after saying that she couldn't, that she wasn't responsible, that it's independent. And so this went on back and forth, and it was, I think, a little bit nuts and quite disrespectful of taxpayers' dollars, 5.2 million of them. And now they have an interim Auditor General for local government rather than doing the right thing.
AGLG.
Right, the AGLG. And they've said, they're going to study it, they're going to do a report. They've hired somebody to now do a report. So I don't know how much that's costing. The Auditor General for local government that was fired is now taking government to court about the firing, so we don't know how much that's costing. The government promised to consult with the UBCM. They represent all local governments. To consult with them around this report. They haven't done that. I checked with the UBCM just this last week and they've never heard from them, but the report apparently is done. It's in the minister's hands. So they just, they just keep wasting money and spinning it rather than doing the right thing and saying, you know what, local governments sometimes do need some help. They do need a review on some of their performance measures. Some of these local governments, Tim, are very tiny and could really use some help, but that's not what they're doing. They're not giving it to the Auditor General for the province where they might be able to actually get some support that they need.
It strikes me as a lot of grandstanding. Or is that just being cynical?
Well, I would love to not be that cynical. I'm still relatively new in this role, but given what I've seen over the last 2 years, there's all these, the ideas are presented as somehow getting to the bottom of something. We're gonna toe the line on spending by local governments, when the reality is they are very minimalistic in their spending. I was actually just at a conference last week talking to one local government, and they reduced their staffing by 25% over the last number of years. And they get really frustrated when they're told that they overspend, when in fact that's not the case. So there's some real problems with how this government treats local governments.
Along the same lines, you were talking about homelessness prior to the break, and when we talk about local governments, one of the things that we hear is that the provincial government basically dumps responsibility onto local governments and then doesn't give them any money to begin with. How much of a problem is that part of the homelessness issue as well? Well,
it's certainly, in our community, was certainly part of the homeless issue. We have Riverview, of course, in Coquitlam, Millardville, and government has been sitting for the last 14 years, not doing anything with it, not developing a plan, not developing a vision. And so we know that part of what's happened with the closure of Riverview, that the monies that were set aside for mental health support and services never really materialized in the community. So as a result, we have this huge challenge. Well, who's left dealing with this huge challenge, this huge gap in service? Well, it's local governments, and we've been hearing and witnessing in Port Moody, in Coquitlam, in Nelson, British Columbia, and now in Maple Ridge. A number of these local communities are stepping up. People would say they're stepping up, but they're taking on responsibilities that don't belong to them. So they're hiring mental health police officers who specialize in dealing with the mentally ill. In Maple Ridge, this just happened last week, they've actually hired outreach workers, social workers, to deal with their homeless community because they're worried in their community. It's affecting their businesses, it's affecting their residents, and residents have gone to mayor and council saying you need to do something. So they are taking, there's only one taxpayer, so they are spending out of their budgets, their precious dollars, on mental health services that really belong and are the responsibility of provincial government. And this is what I call offloading has resulted in. And so it's really painful when provincial government, wags a finger at local government, when really it should be local government wagging a finger at provincial government.
I mean, this is the whole. It's not just. I mean, we talk about homelessness, but it's a whole mental health issue. I mean, local governments are where community or citizens are most closely related to local governments, right? Yes. So you're having this situation where local governments are trying to solve problems because they're right there.
Yes, I mean, I will confess to being a little bit of a local government geek. We had a 2-week break in April when we weren't in the legislature. We were back in our communities doing work. It was a Monday night. My husband was out of town, and I thought, oh, it's a Monday night. I'll go to a council meeting. And I just showed up, and it was lovely. I know this sounds really weird and dorky, but it was lovely to see citizens who were very nervous very, very nervous, get up in front of a microphone and talk to 9 people and say, this project, I don't support it because X, Y, and Z. You know, there's some land use issues going on. Or I support this project because. And they take time out of their busy lives because this is where they get to voice their opinion. This is where they get to actually talk about their community and what's important to them. And then the decision makers sitting on the other side, they have to make a decision in front of all of these people who have found the courage and the time to speak their mind. And so it's really where you're closest to the people. It's really the first order of government. And they do the best they can with what they've got. And this provincial government, this Liberal government, really doesn't give them the kudos that I think that they deserve, or recognize the impact of their provincial decisions. They get offloaded onto another area of government, who then have to pick up the pieces and do the best they can with what they have. And really not working together. And really, we do need to be working together. And this government keeps demonstrating ways in which it does not work well with local governments.
And it must be so frustrating for somebody who came from that realm to look at this and go, what are they missing?
Well, there's a much better place to go. The truth is, everyone says there really is only one taxpayer, and it's true. And most citizens don't make a distinction about whether or not it's, you know, federal, provincial, or local government. I continue to door knock, and I was out, I think, maybe 2 months ago, and I asked a woman, I was like, so what are some of the issues for you in your community in terms of, you know, how the government is performing, like what matters to you? And she looked at me and she says, you know, that street light down the way, it's been out for like 3 months, and, you know, it's not good. And I just like, okay, that's local government. It's not me. It's not provincial. And I thanked her, and I said, I'm going to give Benita Zerillo, you saw her picture earlier, I'm going to give her a call and make sure that you two connect so that she knows to follow up. So citizens don't make a distinction. They just want, you know, clean streets. They want people taken care of. They want access to doctors. They don't want homelessness. They want us all working together to address these issues. And when you continue to offload onto local governments, that means that you're not working on behalf of the citizens.
So the idea that there's just one taxpayer, not a slogan, it should be a call to action.
It's a call to action, and it's about how you work with people. It's not just words. It's so how do you work with your partners in other levels of government? And I don't think this government does a very good job of that, and I would like to change that.
That's a good place to end. That's all the time we have for Constituency Report with Selina Robinson. Thanks for watching on Shaw. I'm Tim Renneberg, your host. My guest has been Selina Robinson, the MLA for Coquitlam-Millardville. Thanks for watching.